Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Saturday. Now, I had a choice to make here, America. Could I spend the show on Jussie Smollett? Does anybody really give a damn about Jussie Smollett? We know what the Illinois Supreme Court did over and over and over again. Jussie Smollett. I don't care about Jussie Smollett. Do you really? Is that what you want us to spend our Saturday evening together doing? I have a better idea. An exciting, fantastic, spellbinding subject. Recess appointments. Now, the only person on the face of the earth who can make this intriguing and interesting is me. Let's be honest. But it's crucially important. If you voted for Donald Trump, you want Donald Trump to succeed, you care about limited government, you care about getting the bureaucracy under control, this is very important, and I'll make it very interesting. And it has nothing to do with Matt Gaetz per se, or any nominee per se. It has to do with the principle and the Constitution and the issue. When you have a newly elected president and he seeks to select individuals to fill these major positions, he only has a handful of them. There's 2.5 million bureaucrats. We have what is really an unconstitutional massive bureaucracy, a fourth branch of government that's not even in the Constitution. We understood there needed to be some bureaucracy, right? Some delegation of authority, but the delegation of lawmaking to a bureaucracy that actually writes 95% of the laws you have to live with, whether you can drive a car that uses a combustion engine, what kind of lawnmower you can use. None of that's done by Congress. All of it's done by bureaucrats. And that lawmaking power is not even in the legislature. It's in the executive branch. So separation of powers being destroyed. Representative government, as John Locke and Montesquieu discussed, two of the great philosophers that your framers of the Constitution listened to and read. What kind of representative government is when we have this massive bureaucracy off on its own doing whatever the hell it wants to do no matter who's elected? Well, there's one party in America who thinks that's great because the bureaucracy basically belongs to them. It's the Democrat Party. So when Republican presidents come in, they now have a practice, and that practice is to try and kneecap them, to try and destroy their presidencies before they're even sworn in on Inauguration Day. That is, to prevent them from getting their nominees in the positions of cabinet secretary and sub-cabinet secretary positions in order to run the bureaucracy and advance their policies that they ran on and on which they got elected. The Democrats are happy with that. Some liberal establishment Republicans are happy with that. It's the surest way to destroy an incoming president from doing what he promised to do when he ran for office. It's the surest way to undermine the American people and to usurp the election outcome, particularly in a landslide, is to prevent a president from having the personnel he needs to run the government. Now, there may be controversial nominees. That's fine. There have been in the past and so forth and so on. But we're talking about a party, the Democrat Party, Chuck Schumer. We're talking about some Republicans, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and their ilk, who really don't want Donald Trump to succeed, do they? They kind of like this big, massive bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., pushing around the American people. They haven't done anything to stop it. In fact, they've helped create it. And so the same people who've created this situation, well, damn, they don't want to reform it. And that's the issue, not Jussie Smollett. Jeff Van Dam, some time ago, writing at Northwestern University Law Review as a law student, he pointed out from 1789 until 1961, the Senate rejected only 8 presidential nominees to cabinet positions. Only 8. Through the use of such dilatory measures, though, the Senate has achieved a nearly unfettered ability these days to frustrate typical nominations. And the recess appointment power has likewise evolved to allow the executive the ability to combat such obstruction. So there's a change, really, the appointment clause and the recess appointment clause, both of which are in the Constitution. I see some of our friends commenting and saying, hey, wait a minute, Donald Trump's talking about recess appointments. That's going to destroy our liberty. That's going to destroy separation of powers. My God, what are we going to do about this? The Speaker of the House, he better not go along with this. The Appointments Clause has been utterly changed and abused since 1961, and even before. The Recess Appointments Clause has been used by presidents to push back separation of powers. It's an abuse of the advise and consent provision that enables senators, especially the party opposite, the Democrat Party in this case, and some of these never-Trumper senators who were not up for re-election and didn't face the voters a few weeks ago, to thwart the president and his policies, thereby empowering this massive bureaucracy to function as it chooses, the status quo. And this is why the Democrats will shut down the government before allowing one penny to be cut from the bureaucracy or one employee to be cut from the bureaucracy. It's essentially theirs. They own it. The bureaucracy, in so many respects, when you have a Republican president, when you had Reagan and especially Trump the first time and Trump again, they view their goal as sabotaging the agenda of the incoming president. So we have this massive bureaucracy that the framers never contemplated, which makes 95% of the laws in this country, obliterating the idea of representative government, and, of course, destroying separation of powers. That's the problem, not Donald Trump and the recess appointment clause. Now, I want to remind you why Donald Trump is sensitive to this issue. As Politico wrote back in December 22, 2017, about 100 of President Donald Trump's nominees have been kicked back to the White House. 100. Prolonging an unusually high number of vacancies across his administration and escalating the Senate's long-running nomination wars. So more than any modern president, they decided to thwart Donald Trump's presidency. While the Senate agreed to keep roughly 150 of Trump's picks for consideration next year, carrying them over, it refused to do so in roughly 100 others. According to Majority Leader McConnell's office, that means the White House will have to renominate them if Trump wants them installed. That will trigger a requirement that nominees' paperwork have to be updated. In other words, it's the slow walking, the handicapping of his nominees. So the incoming president, Trump, can't really be an effective president. A gargantuan task for some nominees who've been languishing in the Senate for months, especially if their net worth changed dramatically because of the surging stock market. Any one senator, one, can object to allowing a nominee to be carried over. Is that what the framers intended? I would ask all the phony constitutionalists who were so concerned about this. Though it's likely Democrats are responsible for most of the rejections, Republicans could also have triggered some of them too. President George W. Bush had just 2 picks returned to the White House. Trump had over 100. It definitely violates precedent, said Senator Langford, of sending back so many nominees. That's just a sign of the times, that people are looking for a rule to be able to slow the Senate down even more. That's making a bad situation worse. Now, Ronald Reagan had a problem with this too, because they were trying to do similar things to him. And so his deputy press secretary at the time speaks. He issued this statement in October 1985. I still think this is more interesting than Smollett, don't you? Yeah, I think so. The president is deeply displeased that 70 key appointments touching virtually every area of the executive branch are being deliberately held up by Senate Democratic leader Robert Byrd. These are assistant secretaries, ambassadors, federal circuit and district judges, members of important agencies, commissions, and boards. Over 5,000 mid-level career military personnel alone are being denied promotions and pay raises. It's the largest backlog of presidential appointments in modern history, only to be checked by Donald Trump. He had the biggest. And so you can see the pattern. The abuse is in the Democrats, or senators generally, using the advice and consent clause to cripple an incoming Republican president, or even midterm in the case of Reagan, they don't like how things are going, so trying to cripple him during the course of his presidency. He said President Reagan did not evade the Senate's power to confirm. The individuals he's appointed had already been nominated before the recent Senate recess. The Senate just hadn't acted on the nominations. And those appointees were renominated when the Senate returned. So they go through this progress, this arduous progress, renominating them, refiling papers, and Byrd still sat on them. Just as Schumer would still sit on them. So the president's supposed to sit there or flop around like a flounder on the beach and just hope the goodwill of these wonderful senators, they'll come to their senses and they'll do what they're supposed to do, because advice and consent was never intended to be what it's become. Attorney General Edwin Meese, January 5, 2012. He wrote as a former U.S. Attorney General, and as did Tom Gaziano, who co-wrote the piece with him, and a former Office of Legal Counsel lawyer who provided advice to presidents on recess appointment issues. We have defended and will continue to defend the lawful use of the recess appointment power. Although originally conceived by the framers for a time when communicating with and summoning senators back to the Capitol might take weeks, it is still valid in a modern age, but only as long as the Senate is in recess. They were responding to Barack Obama, who, like most leftists, was abusing the so-called recess provision by claiming that the Senate was in recess when it wasn't. So this Donald Trump, we have to worry about him, and the Speaker of the House to go along, and oh my God, this dictatorship is actually coming true. Recess appointments, since George Washington, for 1,000 different reasons, and in modern times having nothing to do with travel, have been used throughout our history, and by every single president except William Henry Harrison, because he died a month after he was sworn in, has been used over 1,000 times. Over 1,000 times. And yet they want you to believe that Donald Trump is a threat. We senators, we have a prerogative. Well, the president has a prerogative too. You're not the only one with the Constitution, senators. President does too. It's called the Recess Appointments Clause. Now, when we look at this graph that I want to show you, you can look at modern presidents up to Barack Obama. You see Franklin Roosevelt used the clause 89 times. And by the way, he had a Democrat Senate the entire time. Harry Truman 195 times. Dwight Eisenhower 193 times. Now, in the case of Eisenhower, he used the Recess Appointment Clause for 3 Supreme Court justices. 3 Supreme Court justices. Now, he went back and nominated them for a full confirmation process, but nonetheless, that's what he did. John Kennedy 53 times, Richard Nixon 41 times, Gerald Ford 12 times. Of course, he was in office about 4 minutes, Ford, but nonetheless. Jimmy Carter 68 times. Ronald Reagan has the record 243 times. 243 times. George H.W. Bush 77 times. William Clinton 139 times. George Bush 171 times. That's a lot. And Barack Obama, who was abusing the idea of what a recess is, he had it 28 times. And so this is nothing new. It's not the end of the world. Donald Trump is looking for ways to carry out his mandate. He's looking for constitutional ways to do it. And so I just want to underscore this point because the media don't know what they're talking about. Certain commentators who beat their chests about how brilliant they are, they certainly don't know what they're talking about. This is the reality. The advice and consent clause in the Constitution is not being used as intended by the framers of the Constitution. They're being used to try and cripple an incoming president of the opposite party or an incoming president of the same party with whom the establishment of that party disagrees. And remember, again, only 1/3 of the Senate is up at any time, so 2/3 of these senators didn't face the wrath of the voters this last time around. And so a president obviously has the need and the right to populate his administration. If, in fact, there's a nominee here and there, we get it. But Donald Trump's experience with the Senate is it wasn't a matter of here and there. It was a matter of, oh, we're going to block 100 of your nominees. What? And I can promise you, he's not going to be able to get done what he needs to get done, what he wants to get done, what you want him to get done, if the Senate continues to conduct itself this way. And a reminder, this Senate is responsible for so many of the problems that Donald Trump's trying to fix. So, of course, as I said earlier, they're not going to want to reform themselves. Not in the least. Okay, we'll keep an eye on this. Jussie Smollett? I don't give a damn about Jussie Smollett.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.